Industry. We are a nonprofit organization that empowers North American organizations to act on climate change by providing services and tools to help organizations reduce their emissions. TCR is advised by a council of jurisdiction that includes representatives from diverse states and Canadian provinces and territories. The Climate Action Reserve and the Climate Registry co-host a joint delegation of diverse leaders from the U.S., states, local jurisdictions, the private sectors, and sovereign tribal nations to COP. We've been doing that for over a decade, beginning with COP 13 in Bali in 2007. And over the past number of years, we have worked closely with our friends at the U.S. Climate Alliance and to find opportunities for U.S. states and territories to highlight the importance of subnational climate policy and ambition to advance climate action on climate solution. And as one of our, we have a lot of favorite governors, don't we? But one of our favorite governors, he always would say, "We're not subnationals, we're supranationals." So that's quote that's attributed to Jay Inslee. So now that we're doing something that won't be seen in many other rooms at COP or even back home, we're bringing together women leaders. And TCR is proud to be a woman-led organization and has been for most of our history, starting with our founding executive director, Diane Wittenberg, and we have also had some groundbreaking women climate leaders steward our board over the years, including Mary Nichols and Gina McCarthy. It has certainly been our experience that a diversity of perspectives drives more ideas, innovation, and inclusion. And these things we need a lot more of, given the scale and urgency of the climate crisis. And that brings me to the incredible women I have the privilege of introducing today, each of whom has played and continues to play a pivotal role in driving positive change in the world. So thank you for being here, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our four esteemed speakers and invite each of them to address a kickoff question to our discussion today, and that is for them to share a bit about how they got into this work, the path that led them here, and maybe even what keeps inspiring them to do this work. So joining me on the stage today is Maryland Environmental Secretary Serena McElwain. We also have Sequoia Climate Foundation President Christy Ullman, and California Air Resources Board Chair Leanne Randolph. Last but not least, Climate Mayor's Executive Director Kate Wright. So ladies, take it away.
Yeah, I'll go first. So this is an interesting panel where we're going to be moderators and panelists. This is going to be so much fun.
Who's going to be our timekeeper?
I know. Someone has
Casey?
to keep.
Okay.
Yeah, who's going to manage us? Okay. All right. So just quickly, for me, I will say one thing, since this is about women's leaders. I remember being at the Department of Energy, and I was at Fossil Energy, and I remember being in all the meetings, right? All the heads, they were all men. Like there was no one woman over any of the departments, and I just thought, wow, we need to change that. So that was an inspiration. But my career path, I started off in being an administrator. So I was responsible for all of the operations of many agencies in the federal government, which is my background. And as I started moving up in the federal government and being a chief operating officer and just over all the operations, 15 years later, I found myself at the Department of Energy. And it's when I landed in Department of Energy is when I started to get more into the policy areas, because I kept going higher and higher. And I found myself being responsible for policy areas like fossil energy, oil and gas, coal, all of those policy areas. And it was just interesting to me. And I thought, wow, at this level, I could make a difference. And I just started really, as I was having to manage and evaluate policy, I just became my love. And so I left fossil energy and went to US EPA in San Francisco. I went there as the assistant regional administrator, and then it just took off from there, the environmental piece of it. And again, I climate change has always been an issue for me, and I've always wanted to be a part of that, be a part of the solution. So I'm in my dream job now and have been in the last 10 years where I can make a difference and make sure that the state I'm in now, Maryland, that we're moving forward and we're doing great things when it comes to fighting climate change.
So I'm a lawyer by trade. I grew up, my dad was a military officer, my mom was a public school teacher. And so for me, and and like I was in high school in the Reagan era, right? When it was like government was the enemy. And in my mind, it was like government is like the solution people. Like they're the people who help you out and teach you, protect you. And as I got older, realized, make the policy that improves the world. So I, when I was a kid, I wanted to be Secretary of State, and then I went off to law school after college, and kind of worked in and out of government, but always appreciated how to build effective solutions to problems. And in 2011, I was actually in December 2010, I was at a party and I was working in private practice and I was bored out of my mind. And I said to my friend, like, oh, I need a new job. And he's like, well, Governor Brown had just been elected, like, oh, he's gonna, he's got an administration to build, and he just hired this or appointed this natural resources secretary, and, I know he needs a general counsel. You should really think about it. I was like, no, 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 no. My kids are little. I don't want to I don't want a big government job. And I said, no. He said, I'll pass your name on it. I was like, no, no, don't do it. Don't do it. 2 days later, John Laird calls me and is like, I hear you want to do something different. Come to the resources agency. And so I built on some of the local government work I had done, some of the environmental law I had done, and just fell in love with tackling these critical issues in California around climate change, around water, around energy. Then went to the Public Utilities Commission and then came to CARB. And it's been an amazing experience. And it's interesting because the first person who had my job was a scientist, right? Like the guy who discovered that ozone caused smog, right? Like that is not me, right? And then like Mary Nichols, the other person who, one of the most famous chairs of CARB, deep decades of environmental experience. And then I was like, okay, me, government lawyer person. But it's been great. I love it. It's pretty awesome. And so I feel really honored to serve the people of California and to meet amazing women like this in my work.
Well, I did not have Secretary of State ambitions growing up, I can tell you that much. So I grew up in Tulare County in California. It is a county with some of the worst air quality in the United States. I did not know that every soccer team didn't break at halftime and have their Capri Sun and their orange slice and use their inhaler. I just thought that's what everyone does, right? So when I moved away and started reading about the air quality impacts and the geography of the state, the region, and how it was all influenced by transportation and housing and all those policies, I started looking at what was going on in my hometown differently. And so by the time I became an aunt and my nephew was hospitalized multiple times before he was 3 years old for respiratory issues and just ended up back in the hospital when I was back for Thanksgiving. So seeing that firsthand and then moving away and getting to study in Paris and getting to study in Freiburg, Germany, and studying Netherlands and how they reacted to the Arab oil embargo as part of my thesis, realized that, oh, there are all these things that we can do, the way that we invest, that has a huge impact on public health and on the environment. And for me, growing up somewhere that it wasn't really an option to do anything but drive, and then living in a place like Paris where I lived for 6 months and, never had a car and walked everywhere and took the metro and getting to study at UC Davis, one of the top bicycling cities in the United States, I realized there can be a very high quality of life that is much better for the environment and much better for the planet as well. So for me, it was realizing that a lot of these decisions are related to land use patterns and are related to local decisions. Cities are where the majority of people live and where the majority of pollution is as well, where the majority of emissions are. And it's also a scale at which you can innovate. So I got really excited about working with local governments, ended up doing an externship out of grad school at an organization that I ended up working every position until I became executive director. So I understood that organization inside and out and did that for 8 years, and then decided that I wanted a more national platform and moved over to Changemakers, which has been really an amazing experience and great to work with state partners like U.S. Climate Alliance and be able to work with our federal partners as well and just really recognize the necessity of action at each of those levels.
So nice to hear everyone's stories. So I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I moved around some, but I think growing up with kind of nature in the background always was kind of one lens in which I saw the world. And I, from the very beginning, was always interested in kind of global, international, public issues. So I went through high school with that focus. My parents did not have that focus. I fell a little far from the tree, and they, it was like go to business school, get your MBA, do that, you will be fine. So I decided that was not my path, and after undergrad, I moved abroad for a few years. I did things in the public health space in Spain and Thailand. I decided to apply for public health school. In writing my public health application, I was like, this is not what I want to do. And then I was like, public policy is what I want to do. So I went to public policy school. From there, I graduated in a recession. Happens. So I decided to apply for the Presidential Management Fellowship, which is a federal government fellowship. It's a wonderful opportunity if you don't know about it. So I got that. I also started at Department of Energy. I was able to go there because I got an internship at Chrysler. I left New York City to go to Detroit. That happened for a summer. So it was an adjustment, but it was a worthwhile one. At the time, that year, Chrysler laid off, I believe, 14,000 people. It was a rough year, if you remember that. So anyhow, I started at Department of Energy. That was an amazing opportunity. It did not start in my favorite office, so I found my way to my favorite office. So I left that. I worked at Treasury. I just saw my Treasury boss walk by, Billy Pizer. So I entered in the Climate and Clean Energy office. It had some name, like the Energy Environment Office. Moved back to DOE. I worked for the current Deputy Special Envoy for Climate for several years. Followed him over to the White House, CEQ, back to DOE. Trump election, left government when my office got shut down and defunded. So from there, I think one of the opportunities that was amazing. I loved the policy work. It punches above its weight in terms of making and catalyzing change. I haven't left that. And leaving government, I still love the inside track. I love being here. I love thinking about policy change and how to catalyze change at a large scale for public good. I love the international dimension of that. Just met with several countries understanding what the cultural dimension is, what the political economy dimension is, what are the resources in that country. So those various lenses, I love that. I love thinking about the complexity of systems change. So from there, entered philanthropy, and philanthropy has this inside track component, but it also has this outside track component. So how do we fund and work with civil society to catalyze change? This inside track and outside track, when they come together, that's when I think big change can happen. So mobilizing policymakers and decision makers inside and outside of government, that's been a really interesting journey. Carrots and sticks, litigation, all the way through support and comms. So that's what gets me excited. I'm also in my dream job. I had the opportunity, I worked at a foundation, and an opportunity to come over to Sequoia. I was the first hire in a large new global climate foundation. So I've got a little startup experience on the back of my government experience, and I'm just finishing my 4 years at Sequoia.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the first question, which is, um, what's a good day? Like, what happens in a day when you're like done for the day and you're just like, oh my gosh, that was an amazing day?
I'm happy to do that. So days like this for me. So I have the privilege of working with so many amazing, passionate mayors, particularly some of the for Gender Equality Day, right? Particularly some of the female leaders. There's so many young leaders coming into the mayor's role. The mayor of Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu, 38 years old, just a powerhouse. So getting to see the work that they're doing on the ground, getting to see how passionate they are and tactical and tangible they are and how real they're making this issue for their communities, that always is so inspiring for me.
I'll say for me, for my day, what makes me feel good and energized is when I walk into my office in my building at Maryland's Department of the Environment. I look on the wall. They have all the photos of all the previous secretaries, and all of them were mainly white men on the wall, two women in the whole history, no black. So every time I see my picture at the end, I just smile and get ready for, the day. But what really makes that what really makes that exciting is the environmental justice communities, they notice that picture at the end too. So when I walk into those neighborhoods, the smiles on their faces, the environmental groups, all this energy I'm getting because they feel like you look like me, some of them, right? And we trust that what you're going to do, you're going to make a difference. And it just makes me feel good. So I'll have listening tours all across Maryland, going to different neighborhoods that have been left behind. And I go there and I speak with them one on one. I even go to some of their community meetings and I let them know change is going to happen. And I've been demonstrating that when it comes to permits, looking at regulations. Everything we do is from an equity lens. And they are energized. And I just literally, I go home and just want to do a skip or something because it feels so good. Yeah.
I'll just add a more personal dimension because, we're all, it's lovely to be among women leaders and everyone's a person. So I have 3 kids under 8. So, and I had one kid on during this job of running a startup. So I think that is female leadership, taking maternity leave at 2 years into a startup. It's funny when I shared it with the team, I was like, okay, please, I asked my assistant at the time to pull slides of all the women leaders who have had children during their tenure. And there's quite a few of them. There are heads of state who have had that, right? So it's pretty amazing. So I think the message is, it's not perfect, but you can do it all. You can do it all. When I got married, my husband and I did not have the plan for him to be a stay-at-home dad, but he is one. And it enables me to be in Dubai for a COP. So this is like, I love, policy making, meeting with ministers, thinking about how we influence decision and catalyzing change. And we're all humans too. And like being able to do that and fit in our lives while being female leaders, that's not something that was available, to women not that long ago. So it's really nice to be able to do that.
Okay, here's my story about the kid and the job thing. So my first appointed job, Governor Gray Davis appointed me to chair the California Fair Political Practices Commission, and I was pregnant at the time. And it was his second term. It was like, oh, this is going to be really mellow. I'll just have this kind of relative small agency, not much going on. And the recall qualified about 2 months after I started the job. So I was like 6 months pregnant. Um, the election happened when I was 8 months pregnant. There was it was incredibly controversial campaign finance issues. And I'll never forget, I'm out to here, I'm in the boardroom, and Dan Moraine Evan knows who he is like, in my face. This reporter is like, why aren't you holding Cruz Bustamante accountable? And I mean, it was just like, it was insane. Um, and now they're all grown up and off to college and grad school. And it's like, I'm coasting and I get to be in Dubai for that reason.
Yeah, I'll
So-
say hope, keep hope alive. They do grow
Yes.
up and they leave. 'Cause mine are grown too.
I think daycare at COP would help other women be here. There's things that we can do to support women leaders. In addition to telling, like, I think there's resources available. My job, I was able to get jobs twice when I was like on maternity leave. And having to ask for, actually, I need support for a nanny to come with me to that. Like that's the conversation that we're starting, but it should be in place. So I think thinking about the policies that can be in place, that now that we're heads of institutions, how do we, pay that forward? And I think fresh at COP.
Well, I'm curious how you all lift women up. So as talking about that there are new opportunities that other generations may not have had, how do we continue to pave the way and provide mentorship and make it easier for the next generation of female leaders?
For me, I look throughout my organization and I see the young women. I have one right now, right here. Rachel, she's the climate advisor in the office, in my office. And I mentor young women in the agency. I think our role as a leader is to mentor. You have to be a mentor. You have to be an executive coach. You have to do all of those things and pay attention to the women that are in your organization. I also, because I'm the leader, I get a chance to allow for women to do what they need to do while they're having children and while they're raising families. So I'm a woman. I had children as a single mom, so I'm sensitive to it. So I make sure that that door is open for women to grow your family, grow your career, just grow. I'm going to support you. So I think that's the difference when we are women leaders. And again, an example with just Rachel. Rachel was in one office. We could see that she was a rising star. And so with rising stars, I'm not saying men do not do that. They do, I think some maybe. But me, I can push her to another level that she doesn't think she's ready for. Because I have to say, with men, they think, hey, I'm 40% ready. I'm ready for that next job. And they'll apply for a job. They've never even done a little bit of the work. They go in confident. They get the job and they just grow up. And next thing they know, they're heading an agency or a company. So with women, I do the same thing. I'm like, you might not be quite ready, but you have potential. You're going to be the next XYZ. And that job, I've jumped them up a couple of levels, right? So that's what I do.
I mean, I think one way is to is to mentor, to listen, and to tell our stories. Right? Tell the story of when I was a junior associate at a law firm and the senior partner yelled at me at 3 a.m. and I went to my office and burst into tears. And it's like, this happens, right? And it's okay. And if you feel like you're not measuring up, you're not alone. And so take a moment to remind yourself you are measuring up. And so and sort of, the experiences with family, same thing. It's these experiences are real, these feelings are real, and just being supportive of one another. And also making sure that when you're in a conference table, and you see women that aren't talking and men that are talking a whole lot, what do you think?
Yeah, I love that. Supporting other female leaders, creating kitchen cabinets of female leaders, so there's a support system. Breaking a model of what a leader is, or just being your authentic self. I know some people have come and they're like, this is still leadership. It's different than what I'm used to, which I welcome. Like, what does that look like? What does leadership that's effective in a authentic female voice? Like, setting the mold for that, and then welcoming others to find their own voice in that.
I found it come up even around pay and hiring. So I have found that when I've hired, men always negotiate for a higher pay coming in, and a lot of the women won't negotiate as high. So I've tried to just factor that in because I have seen that be the case over and over again. And same with raises. I, I have found that my female staff are way less likely to ask for raises. And so I have to be the one thinking about that and creating some equitability within pay scales as well. The other thing that I share, speaking about your stories that you're sharing, I tell stories about how, I was an executive director for many years and still was getting asked to take notes in meetings with mainly male executive directors. And I never picked up a pen, and whether I had to say I have bad handwriting, like, I'm not doing it, right? And so, I tell my female staff that as well. They're always volunteering to take notes. I'm like, no, be in the conversation. You're not here to take notes. So there's little stuff like that, a number of meetings where I'm in with my male staff and the principals keep deferring to my male staff that, work for me. And halfway through, after half an hour of the male staff saying, I don't know, what do you think? Sharing stories like that as well.
I'm going to jump in with the next question. Or did you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say, don't you notice, though, that there's so many women leaders now that that issue is starting to kind of go away? Men are just used to women being in power now. I mean, it's everywhere. So I think hope is alive.
I
We're
think
keeping
so
it
too.
alive.
All our Gen Z applicant women ask for more than we offer. So, and we're competitive, by the way. So power to youth, right? Like keep it up, keep us accountable. So you three women have large roles in domestic change. So pivoting a little bit to more climate substance here. On the backs of the Inflation Reduction Act, would love to hear, you have all different roles in a subnational agenda. What are you prioritizing? How are you prioritizing? What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, game changer, absolutely. Unprecedented levels of funding. It also creates a lot of capacity needs for my mayor. So, dealing with everything from pothole issues to homelessness, and now trying to navigate hundreds of new grant programs. It's a good problem to have because it means there's money out there, but they don't have additional capacity to write these grants, to track and prioritize which funds to go after. So we're doing that, but I see a tremendous amount of opportunity within that space. The other challenge that our cities face, we love our Climate Alliance states, right? They're doing great work, but with so much funding flowing through states, we have a lot of mayors that they are, with state preemption issues, they want to require buildings to be more energy efficient. They are very concerned about building sustainability and resilience, but they're not allowed. They face state preemption issues to be able to do that. So a lot of the main sectors that produce greenhouse gas emissions, they're not able to regulate. And so, all their municipal buildings are built to LEED, but they can't do anything about the private sector and about residential buildings coming in. And so, I think we really need to figure out how do we take the great work that U.S. Climate Alliance states are doing and figure out how to spread that to other states as well.
I mean, for us in California, it's just been such a huge kind of feeling of wind at our sails. It's like slog, slog, slog. And then all of a sudden you've got the IIJA, you've got the IRA, you've got the CHIPS Act. And it's, catalyzing all of this investment. And there's just so much support. So, probably my favorite example is the NEVI funding to provide more fast chargers on transportation corridors. And we've got a ton of charging in California. We have we're actually ahead of our targets on the numbers of DC fast chargers that we anticipated installing. But we constantly, the sort of the whataboutisms that we call it, like, oh, but this will never scale because we don't have enough charging. Oh, but the IIJA has provided this NEVI funding, and this is going to help solve that problem. And also a lot of the support for some of the more controversial climate strategies, right? In California, we get a lot of pushback when we talk about things like carbon capture, or when we talk about the need to consider what the role of hydrogen is, and how that hydrogen gets produced, the need for renewable fuels in our low carbon fuel standard. And so having the Biden administration kind of step up and say, you know what, we need these solutions on the table. Like, this is a crisis. We need all of the tools in the toolbox, and supporting that with policy has been hugely helpful in California.
Yeah, I'll say that the IRA funding, BIL as well, has just been a game changer. In Maryland, we've been able to push more water infrastructure projects in some of the areas that need it most, because we have a lot of water issues in Maryland. So because of the IRA funding and all the money that has come from US EPA, it has literally just changed our world. But some of the priorities we have, so in Maryland, we have some of the most aggressive climate goals, and we're pushing industry to do things through new regulations, like in the building industry. We're pushing building energy performance standards, and the building owners and all the stakeholders are coming back saying, we can't do this. We can't transition. We can't go to heat pumps. It's just too much. And so we continue to go back to them and say, what about the federal funding? Are you applying for? There's so much money that they're not aware of, or they just don't want to apply for. I don't know. But so my priority is to start educating the folks, the industry, stakeholders that we're pushing through regulation to pay attention to that funding and make sure you get it. And then we're also trying to utilize the IRA funding and the BIO, all the funding, federal funding, to utilize it more in cost sharing. So because when you have that kind of influx of money, you put money onto it, then you get even more money from private sector. So it's that cost share that I'm prioritizing and focusing on the most.
Okay, I have one. Um, let's talk about climate adaptation. How is your states experiencing the impacts of climate change? What are the conversations you're having with your mayors about those impacts? And what are you seeing as some positive steps towards mitigating or adapting to the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, my mayors are on the front lines, right? So we've got Mayor Cantrell here from New Orleans, who really on the front lines, who developed one of the first resilience hubs. So they're doing a lot of great work to figure out how to capture and slow down water, and creating some really exciting models that other mayors are looking to. Extreme heat, I mean, hottest year on record. So my vice chair is the mayor of Phoenix, Mayor Gallego. I mean, they had almost a month of days over 120 degrees, just craziness. They had people falling and getting third-degree burns from the pavement. So thinking about, they have a resilience hub as well. They have a extreme heat czar. They're doing a lot of urban greening and cooling surfaces, and looking at all the ways that they can do what they can to adapt to the reality. And I think what's exciting is that can make this conversation real. I mean, people see the benefit right away, real time. I mean, just walking around here, the shade versus when you don't have those shade structures, I mean, you feel it right away. It's at least a 5-degree difference.
So in Maryland, we're pushing forward really hard when it comes to climate change, and I was talking just in another panel about all the smokes that came to Maryland and really across the country from Canada, right? And so the air, every time we think we're ahead, we had just met the air quality standards. We were bragging. We went to lunch and celebrated, and the next day we couldn't breathe. It literally was like, what is all the smoke? We're doing great in Maryland. And so just issues like that. When you think you're ahead, something comes along. a climate issue, and it's impacting all of us. And we're right back where we started. And so just trying to figure out ways to capture carbon in different ways, not just utilizing the technology that's out there for carbon capture and utilization and storage. But so looking at trees, right? We have a new initiative where we're investing in 5 million trees in Maryland. That's big, right? So we want to find ways to get carbon out of the atmosphere. So we have a lot of initiatives like that. One last thing, we also have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is Reggie, a Cap and Invest program. So we're looking at, okay, we're just capping one sector. What about like what you all do in California? What about capping other sectors and holding everybody accountable for this crisis that we're in?
I mean, I'll just, well, we're funders of U.S. Climate Alliance and support, we have a large U.S. portfolio to support subnationals and federal entities, governments alike. I think one thing just to raise up here is I also have a perch where we're working in several mini economies, right? And those most vulnerable, they're facing more challenges, even have as much climate impact with every, in my case, philanthropic dollar. And I think it's giving policymakers, whether at the subnational or federal level, the policy toolkit and the research and the resources that they need to make the decision on, okay, where do I make a mitigation investment? Where do I make an adaptation resilience investment? There's an overlap there. I was talking to a friend last night, resilient mitigation. Can we just coin that term and make that happen so that we have a win-win on thinking about health and growth and economic development. On the same time, we're thinking about climate impact, and that is not easy. Sometimes there are hard trade-offs. I think raising up the co-benefits discussion, talking about it's not just an economic development conversation any longer. It's putting people, hearts, minds, people's economic opportunity, their health, also in that decision making alongside economic growth are essential in how we think about the kind of the adaptation and resilience spectrum. Thinking about what policymakers have to decide how to spend their budgets.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess it's my time. So how are your organizations looking at racial equity in your organizations from a climate perspective? In Maryland, we have something called the Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and we're starting to utilize that a lot more. Legally, we always have these legal challenges. Legally, I would love to say, look at those scores, and we're going to do something different about the permit when we see a high EJ score, but you can't do that. So one of the things we're doing is looking into new laws that will give us the flexibility to be able to really look at those permits in a different way from an equity lens more than we can today. And we also are holding industry accountable for looking at the EJ screen, looking at the score before they come with their permit. So we're doing things like that. And again, I'm also making sure that we're connecting with the communities, hearing from them, having them show up when there's a permit up, for renewal. We're no longer saying, well, no one showed up. We're like, no, show up. Get there. We want to hear. And it's been making a difference. So that's my perspective. So we'll start with you.
So we're sort of tackling the equity issues sort of both on an external and an internal way, right? So I used to serve as a commissioner on the California Public Utilities Commission, and the PUC and CARB are unfortunately two of the least diverse state agencies that we have. You look at the numbers, and it's not great. So part of it is what is the work we're doing internally to do better recruitment, to try to diversify our workforce, make it a more comfortable place to work, a more supportive place to work. So we have that piece, and then there's the policy part. How are we doing our work, and how are we doing our work in a way that benefits all communities in California? So I'll give a couple of examples of some things. One of the things we're working on is something we call the racial equity lens. So in our rulemakings, we are asking the team to consider what the impacts of the regulation are on communities in the state and try to do that thinking and analysis at the beginning, and not wait until someone, from who's a community member from the outside says, "Wait a minute, you just completely didn't think about this, and this," right? Like, let's start with that work. We're also reorienting our incentive programs. Previously, our incentive programs were really kind of meant to be kind of technology forcing, and so we would have, on the hood support to buy electric vehicles, sort of regardless of your income or the price of the vehicle. And we have completely changed that to be income focused, and prioritizing incentive funding in communities that are identified as being impacted by historic pollution pursuant to Cal Enviro Screen, which was a model for the federal government, and their efforts to consider impacts on communities. And of course, there is a total correlation between race and the impacts. And to your point, Serena, like, we're always, every time we're talking about this, we're always like trying to be super careful, with our lawyers, and like, okay, you can talk about it this way, but not that way. But when it comes to air quality in particular, it's like, the correlation is there, so it's not that difficult. And then, I guess the last example I'll give is as we construct our rules and thinking about how our rules benefit communities, we try to prioritize those most impacted communities. So for instance, in our Advanced Clean Fleets rule, we are prioritizing drayage, which are the trucks that go from ports to warehouses, relatively short routes. We're prioritizing those for zero emission, both incentives and regulatory deadlines, because those are the vehicles that impact communities the most. Impact people who live near ports, impact people who live along freeways, and impact people who live in the Central Valley or in the Inland Empire, where the warehouses are. So we're really trying to make sure our policies are consistent with that fundamental goal of lifting up those communities and protecting those who are most impacted.
So at the local level, we're seeing some exciting models. So just thinking about the Justice 40 initiative at the federal level to ensure that 40%, at least 40% of funding goes to the most impacted communities. So we've had mayors adopt that locally. So the mayor of Albuquerque decided, hey, we want to make sure that 40% of all our investments go to the most impacted, at least 40, go to the most impacted communities as well. So we're lifting up models like that. I think what we've really been encouraging our mayors to think more broadly about their role specific to the federal funding that's available, because a pretty small portion actually goes direct to cities, but mayors can play a number of other roles. They can be conveners, they can do outreach, and so thinking about things like the tax rebates and credits, really making sure that that outreach goes to the communities that are most impacted and can benefit the most. And what's exciting is we have tools to tell this to you guys, to your point earlier, where those communities are. So it's not a lack of information now. So if we're doing tree planting, if we're looking at electric vehicle rebates or solar panels or tankless water heaters, how do we start to really ensure that those are going to the communities that are impacted? And everything from, let's make sure that if we're looking at electric vehicle charging stations, we don't want just a super highway of electric vehicle charging stations. We want those in communities where communities can benefit from them as well.
Yeah, so Sequoia as a grant maker, it's very important to get the right voices at the table, right? And we're able to kind of fund the groups that need to be at the table for policy making and decision making. So, how Justice 40 got launched, those groups always don't have the funding and the resources to have the capacity to punch above their weight at the federal level. So in the lead up to IRA passage, the privilege to be able to fund those groups, have them be part of the discussion, have their demands and needs, their livelihoods be up front, so we can land important decisions like the 40%. So that's, I think, the role that philanthropy can play in that type of work. We do it not only at the federal level, the state level policymaking decision, having the right coalitions of stakeholders representing views of various communities of different economic classes, all that is quite important. So being able to fund those groups, we have grantees and re-granters that fund those groups, and we do that internationally too, right? The policymakers, they listen to their stakeholders, right? Because votes matter. So making sure that they're funded in order to be able to represent themselves is a large part of what philanthropy is well placed to do.
So this is my first COP, so I have a question for the three of you, assuming that you have, of course, been to many. What's different about this COP? What are you excited about so far? What will make this COP a success?
What's different about it is I'm here. This is my first time. So I don't have much to contribute to the difference, but I am enjoying all the networking and, more importantly, hearing about the climate challenges with the new president coming on board at COP, and hearing what's different, and just really making sure that we're all are becoming accountable is really encouraging to me, because, I mean, they talked about there's progress, but not enough. And so that scares all of us. So I'm just really excited about hearing all the different ways we can start bringing investments to scale and start really pouring into renewables more. And so all of that I've learned here. It's been amazing, but it's my first year.
This is my second, so
okay.
and the last one was a little different because it was it was the one in Glasgow in 21, which was very COVID-y, right? I mean, it was much smaller. Everything was very sort of just different, right? There was a lot more remote things, and so having all of this interaction has been really great, and seeing the size and scale of, I think, what is sort of more of a typical COP has been really great. And I have to say, I've been kind of enjoying this sort of, I don't know if y'all have been watching the press, like this debate about fossil fuel phase out, phase down, and I feel like it's just such a great conversation to have. And it's sort of, it helps that we're here, where, like, this question is at the forefront. Everyone is thinking about it. And, we're an oil producing state. We're thinking about it. And we're thinking about how to make that transition away from fossil fuels, and, and being intentional and saying, like, we need to be done with this. And what are the steps we need to take to be done with this? And so I'm really appreciating that part of the conversation.
And I just add one thing. That's so happy you said that, because I feel the same way. It feels like we're in this together. It's not just us, because we're pushing hard on regulations to end fossil fuels. And so, yes, I agree with that totally. Sorry.
No, this is far from my first COP. I've been to lots of them. I've been in the international space for a while. So this COP is incredibly large. This is the largest attended COP. So Glasgow, this is probably 3 times what was at Sharm. So I think there's a question of, is this the type of COP that's most sustainable? Obviously, civil society is an important voice. And how do we help the Global South host COP? Is it in this type of, so I think it's worth thinking through what type of COP is optimal to serve multilateral coordination and effectiveness, civil society at the table. It's going to look different wherever it is. Not everyone has the same level of resources as UAE, but it's great to be in a place with this type of infrastructure. It's not always like that. Reinvigorating faith in multilateral institutions and agreements at the international level is important every year. The last major breakthrough was at the Paris Agreement. So here we're at the global stocktake. We are assessing progress against where we are in the Paris Agreement. That's an important thing to do, and doubling down on implementation towards the last set of nationally determined contributions, and looking forward to the next set. And how can we raise ambition at the same time providing the right resources to implement? I think the fossil phase-out call is definitely a worthwhile one. I think one of our objectives on our team is mainstreaming that agenda. It has been. I think we might be there. So holding everyone accountable, mainstreaming that conversation for all countries, corporates, transparency and accountability on net zero plans or on nationally determined contributions. Those are all part of it. The energy package on the table here, I think it's been great to see the progress on that, tripling renewable energy by 2030, doubling the pace of energy efficiency. If we don't hit that energy efficiency target, by the way, globally, it will wipe out the renewable energy progress we make. So energy efficiency is important. DOEers know that. Appliance efficiency standards are critical. So energy efficiency really matters. And the third piece of that energy package that was on the table here that has not yet been agreed to is the fossil phase out. But I have been happy to see the non-CO2 push, including methane. We want to continue to double down on that. Philanthropy made a $450 million commitment 2 days ago towards pursuing the implementation of non-CO2 and all greenhouse gas nationally determined contributions. So we will follow up with countries that are showing ambition through those plans, and we'll be pursuing moving from voluntary, as a little push for all of you guys, moving from voluntary to mandatory. That's something that we think is important, and we'd love to help support anyone that needs help in achieving that. I can go on forever on this, so I'll stop now. I don't know if you have a last question, but I'll just say I'm happy for you to do this in the context of COP, but it might not be the best conversation. So, who inspires you? What are the leaders that you've heard from here that have made you think that, or it doesn't have to be here? Who at home do you look to for guidance, advice? How do you find those leaders? Too hard?
Like, that's a deep question.
Just do the light version.
Gosh. Well, Michelle, who is here with me at COP, and I were talking about who we wanted to have dinner with, and I was like, and I picked Barack Obama, she picked Michelle Obama. I think, California has just had so many incredible leaders that have gotten the state to where it is today. And I think it's sort of that sort of suite of people, right? All the way back to, Governor Brown in the first two terms, and the second two terms, like thinking big. People like my predecessor, Mary Nichols, like also doing big things, and really like implementing and operationalizing change. Because there are so many leaders who are so inspirational and inspire people to solve problems. But I really appreciate the people who are in the trenches actually solving the problems. And so I really appreciate that kind of hands-on leadership that actually sort of gets things done. And I feel like in California, we've had a lot of great people in state government, great legislators, current legislators like Nancy Skinner, who've just, come up with really clear, practical solutions to these challenges. So that's kind of the type of leadership that I look towards.
I'll just say, adding on the Mary Nichols piece, because that was really when I was getting going in my climate career. In addition to everything you just said, always bright red nail polish. And I just thought she always looked so put together and so sharp, and then was just doing this amazing work and was just such a force of nature. I would add just probably recency bias, but Gina McCarthy, I think, just someone who has had such a profound impact in her role as the White House climate advisor, but also someone who is just so funny and witty and approachable, and just balances having such tremendous gravitas with being able to feel like someone you could sit down over coffee with and have a great conversation. And then I would just say, of course I have to say my mayors, but it's true. So Mayor Rhodes Conway, who's my chair now, Mayor Gallego out of Phoenix, people who, are the types that will be, they're in their cities. I mean, they are stopped at every time they go to the grocery store, every time they're at a coffee shop, and they're dealing with those types of, pothole type issues. And then they're also at the White House being the model of how to address extreme heat. Or Mayor Rose Conway was recently at a resilience forum at the White House. So being able to toggle between those worlds so adeptly and be moms and have a presence in their communities is just really inspiring for me.
Can I add one really quick? Sorry. I just have to say, I'm gonna put Joe Biden on this list too, because full disclosure, like I was not super excited, about Joe Biden, and like he's freaking knocking it out of the park, and I just feel like he does not get the credit for it, and so I just think that that's such important leadership, and around implementation, right? Like, he's not like fancy with the vision, but man, he gets shit done. So
I know we're out of time, so I'll say for me, I don't usually, and I've been like this since I was a youngster, 18, I don't pick one leader. Here at COP, everyone here is a leader. All the national leaders who are here speaking, standing up, talking about their goals, pushing climate registry, climate alliance, Gina McCarthy, my ex-boss, Mary Nichols, you, everyone here, we are the leaders, and I'm impressed with all of us because we wouldn't be here otherwise, right? So that's my response to you.
I think that might be the mic drop moment.